Good evening, everyone. The time is 5 p.m. and the Belton Independent School District Board of Trustees are not convening a workshop on Monday, January the 27th, 2025. A quorum of board members is present. This meeting has been duly called and notice of the meeting has been posted in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code, Chapter 551. The second item on the agenda is public comments. Becca, do we have anyone signed up? None. Okay, moving on to item 3. There being no public comments, let's move on to the workshop. Dr. Golan?
Yes, board, thank you for being here this evening. And as you notice, we have additional cabinet members joining us today. They will be adding to the conversation as we go through this evening. And so I just want to welcome them to the table. And we're going to go ahead and get started. Big picture for the workshop tonight is we're going to talk about and go over why we're having this conversation, why are we talking budget, although we always do this time of year, we start working on our budget assumptions. But as you know, we've been doing a lot of work getting ready for that 25-26 budget. So I want to talk about the why we're here. We're going to go into the how we approach the challenge this year, do a quick overview of what was done last year to start to and continue to bring expenditures down in light of our financial situation, and how we approached it this year differently. And then going into a phased reduction plan. So I'm going to present to you 3 phases of that budget reduction, how we've been communicating that, how we'll continue to communicate that. And once I've gone through that, then, one, stop us at any point in time if you have questions, but also know that we should have enough time to go back into each phase. So it'll really be at the pleasure of the board if you want to stop, see the whole thing, or stop at each phase and ask questions. So completely up to you as we go through it, okay? So we're going to get started into why we're here. And I want to first tell you how blessed I feel to be here. So I get to get into classrooms every single week. That's a priority in campuses all across our district. And we are a semester in, little over a semester in, and I'm incredibly proud of what I see. I'm incredibly proud of how hard our teachers and our staff work to create the conditions for our students to thrive. And I know later in the evening, Gabby Nino is going to share some data and academic update for you in showing the hard work and how much our students are continuing to learn and grow in our system. And so there's so much good to talk about. We also know in all the good that's happening in our classrooms and around our district, we face some challenges with our budget. So we started talking last year about, we knew we had adopted a $5 million deficit budget. We knew the impact potentially that was going to have to our fund balance. And so we went to work and started looking at ways to reduce the budget. Coming into this year, the board had adopted, thank you for changing that, adopted an $8 million deficit budget. Belton ISD is like 80% of the school districts in the state of Texas and has had to adopt a deficit budget in the last couple of years. We're not unique in that, but really just want to focus on the context within Belton ISD. And so wanted to just look at the history and then talk about what are some of the reasons this is hitting our budget and some of the reasons why we've had to adopt a deficit budget, but really wanted to take a look back and look several years. And there's a lot on this slide. We're going to mainly, we're not going to look at the certificates at the bottom. Melissa's going to talk about what those mean in a little bit, but really want to draw your attention to, we start with 2017 to 18, and then we go all the way to 2024. And so you will see the budgets that were passed, the dollar amounts that impacted fund balance, the percent that was remaining in fund balance at the end of those years. And so want to talk about why that's important. So it is best practice to have about 2.5 months worth of fund balance in your fund balance account. And our board has a policy to maintain between 21 to 25% within our fund balance. That's super important because what's often unknown is that school districts don't get their money all at one time. And so that fund balance, and Melissa can do a much better job, you need cash on hand in order to make your payroll. And in 2011, I believe it was, you saw across the state a similar situation, districts making significant cuts in their budgets. At that point in time, our state was in a deficit situation, not a surplus situation. And so a lot of school districts had to go out and get loans to make their payroll. And so districts are put in those positions when their fund balances go below that best practice of about 2.5 months of operating expenses. And so I tell you that because if you look, you see a history of the board maintaining really healthy fund balances. Also, when you are a school district that's growing, school districts tend to put a little bit more in fund balance because of the cost of opening new schools. The operational costs, not talking about the construction costs and all of that. And so a couple of things just to highlight when we look at the history as we go along. So you look at, so we were sitting with 34%, 40%. And we want to talk about what started to happen in 2019 and 20. So we opened Charter Oak that year. So that has an impact on staffing and operational costs. That also is a year that the board made a decision to utilize about $3.5 million worth of fund balance in order to address some aging facility issues. And so that was when Dr. Battershell was here, and some good work happened to try to address some of the challenges on some of our campuses. And so that was in 1920 as well. Something else happened in 1920. We experienced a global pandemic, and I'll be talking to you a little bit about some of the effects of that and how it impacted budget moving forward. But I'm going to skip that for a moment and jump into 2021. So again, you're still maintaining good, healthy fund balance during that time. In 2021, we opened Lake Belton High School. So we started with 9th and 10th grade. We also opened Belton Middle School during that time. And we also made around a $1.8 million investment in supporting New Tech's facility as they were transitioning from being a program within a school to its own school. And so that's 2021. 2021. Then move into 21, 22. Then we added another class at Lake Belton High School. The next year, another class at Lake Belton High School. And then in 23, 24, we added Burrell. And of course, 24, 25, we added Hubbard. So within that time period, you've got the expenses of adding two schools because we're a district that was growing. And then I said I'd come back to the pandemic. So since that time, we also know that as students started to come back, attendance rates plummeted across not just the state of Texas, but it was a national phenomenon. It's in national articles and magazines, and so it was not unique to Texas. It was not unique to Belton, but saw a significant decrease in our average daily attendance, which, as you know, that is a significant part to our funding. And so for every 1% of our average daily attendance, that equates to around $1 million in funding for the district. And so we were significantly below where we were pre-pandemic. And you started to see that right away in 2021. We had some hold harmless funds during that time, which is greatly appreciated from our state during that time. That hold harmless for attendance has since ended, but we had that benefit for a little bit. Also during that time, Belton saw this tremendous growth in enrollment when districts across the state were declining in enrollment. We jumped 5.7% in a year that others were seeing serious losses. So when you ask what's been our enrollment trend, it's hard to say it's a trend. So it's gone up, it went really up, it went down, it stayed about the same, it's gone down. There's not been a steady trend. And so big fluctuations in your enrollment impact your budget. And so we started to see that it started to go down. We were still growing, so we were still a growing school district, but at a slower rate than was anticipated. And so I believe it was 23, 24, or 22, 23, so I'm looking to Mike and y'all correct me. It was one of those years that we were projected to have that tremendous growth again, but actually it was close to 400 and something students in actuality in enrollment less than what we expected. We still grew that year. But if you think about that, we already have hired teachers, we already have students in buildings, we're already moving into the school year as you're watching the enrollment still go in, but not at that rate. So all of those factors impact, and that's where you start to see over time, we're starting to see some deficit budgets. We're starting to sit and hover around that 29%. We're going into 24%. And now you're seeing for this year, we would be at that 19% in terms of fund balance. And so anything I'm missing during this time of things that have impacted, I'm going to talk about some other impacts to our budget in a future slide.
It was 22, 23. We grew by 6 or 7%, about 700 students in 21, 22.
Thank you.
We thought we were going to hit that same target range in 22, 23, and it came in at about 350 students or so. So it was around 400 students or so less than projected, or less than we had realized the year before.
So during that time period, all our budgets are online, our audits, we have outside auditors annually that come in and we're required to be audited. We get ratings back from that. We recently had our auditor report to the board before the break. Melissa, can you speak to these certificates down at the bottom?
Sure. So the Certificate of Achievement for both ASBO and GFOA, those are the highest, basically, recognition that a governmental unit can receive for their financial statements. We issue what's called comprehensive financial statements, which means we go above and beyond what's required by generally accepted accounting principles when it comes to financial statement reporting. That means we give additional analysis, more data, and statistical information that also is presented in those financial statements, so it gives full disclosure to our financial information. ASBO is more for school business officials, and then GFOA can be cities, counties, any type of governmental unit as far as those organizations. We've received those certificates of achievement over the past 5 years. And then, of course, School First, everyone knows that that is the accountability rating system that the Texas legislature started and has TEA basically administering, and that's where they are basically holding school districts accountable for how they manage their financial resources. And they're rated on 20 different financial indicators, and you can score up to 100 points off of those indicators. Over the past 13 years, Belton ISD has received what's called the Superior Achievement, which is a 90 or above in those indicator ratings.
And so I asked Melissa to share this because the first rating particularly is about the financial health of your school district. And consistently, Belton ISD from past boards and administrations has scored exceptionally high on that. And so what else is impacting us then and leading us to today having a continued conversation around budget? And I recognize there's a lot on this slide, so I'm going to orient you to it. We're going to start on the far left-hand side at the top. So really looking at, what has been impacting us since 2019 in a couple of areas, just to use these areas as examples. Absolutely, we get funding from our state and are incredibly thankful for that. During this time, when we talk about this record percentage of inflation that we all feel, that every staff member, all of individuals in our community feel, part of what that has done to us, if you look on the left-hand side, so you see $1.2 million. You see a little bit of a gray bar. We're representing funding, absolutely, that we're getting in transportation. We're funded by miles that we drive. The $5 million represents the cost to us during that time, the difference in cost to us. So our fuel costs have gone up. Our bus equipment, any kind of maintenance and operations to buses. So that is what that is costing us to operate our transportation system. And part of that's because we added campuses. You add campuses, you add bus routes. And so in a growing school district, you would expect to see some increased costs with that. We are still down bus drivers, so I'll tell you, we are down 12 bus drivers and are still struggling to be fully staffed in transportation. So in special education, since the pandemic, the other thing that we've seen is a significant increase in the percent of students receiving special education services. Now, some of that is due to changes in the state, with dyslexia now falling under the special education umbrella, but we are also seeing an increase in students with very complex needs. And so you see the increase in the special education dollars being spent versus the dollars that we're given. And so again, do we get money for students who receive special education services? There's a weighted allotment that you do get. It has not kept up with the pace of growth of our students receiving special education services. And when we did legislative circles and listening sessions with our community, our parents and teachers, community leaders and staff, the number one common thread we heard, no matter the group, was people feeling like we still were not staffed where we needed to be in this particular area. Pre-K, as we know, we've got a really robust pre-K program. Incredibly proud of Bex. Invited Representative Buckley to come and look at it not too long ago, because it is people from all across the state asked to tour Bex in school districts all across. And what Sheila and her team have done is remarkable. It is an incredible pre-K program, and we're incredibly proud of that program. We receive half-day funding for that. It's a full-day program. The pupil-teacher ratio is required to be 11-to-1, and so it is expensive to do pre-K, but it's absolutely worth it, and we're incredibly proud of what they do. Bottom slide, bottom quadrant on the left just shows our enrollment growth rate. So as I said, there wasn't really a trend. We were kind of all over. You see the enrollment growth rate, but then you see the attendance growth rate. So great work is happening to try to pull that attendance rate up, but we are still struggling with our attendance, our average daily attendance. Far right-hand side at the top, you see, and we've been talking about, and we all know the inflation impact to our district. It is no different than any other district across the state or anyone's home across the state. That inflation rate has continued to go up, and just as an example, what a 22% inflation rate has had on us, when we looked at our liability insurance and medical insurance, that's equated to a $1.5 million increase over that time. So like our homeowners insurance are going up, our own medical insurance costs are going up, so are those costs for the school district. And then in the bottom final quadrant, you see during this time, we also know we started having a pretty significant teacher shortage across the United States. And so you see that money was continuing, even in spite of a deficit budget, to offer pay raises. We also were faced with adding $1 million in funding our armed security on all our campuses. Legislation we all absolutely agree with and are supportive of. We just did not receive the funding to fully fund that. Also, what's not on this slide is during that time, we saw a 50% reduction in our federal SHARS Medicaid reimbursement. That was a surprise letter that arrived last November that nobody across the state saw. Certainly in school districts, we were completely unaware. And so for Belton ISD, that was about
About 1.3 million.
$1.3 million reduction. We also, during this time, have used ESSER funds to try to maintain lower class sizes. And after the pandemic, we also know, and board, you know, there were a lot of concerns about what we were seeing in classrooms in terms of learning loss and in terms of discipline in the classroom. And so we were able to, during that time, use those funds to help maintain lower class sizes than what we normally would have been able to do. And we've already talked about the additional campuses. And so that is what has led us to this conversation. Prior to starting the Budget Advisory Committee last year, we saw this coming. We started, y'all, I think April Fool's might have been my first day on the job as superintendent, and we started in those 2 months, 2 to 3 months leading up to the end of the school year, looking for what are ways in which we could reduce our expenditures. So we were able to find about $4.9 million worth of reductions, and you see on this chart, this is how we addressed it. The top part is staffing reductions. Nobody was fired. That was done through attrition. And so you see we dropped by those number of FTEs. We also reduced, I believe, campus budgets by 10%. Department budgets were anywhere from 15 to 20% reductions. And then we did some deferments, which meant, could we hold off another year on devices? Could we hold off another year on uniforms for athletics, things like that? It deferred the cost, but it was helpful in this year's budget. As well as continuing to apply for the safety grants for any and all dollars we could get to try to offset some of the safety upgrades and enhancements that we were required to do and needed to do. In spite of this, y'all also know that based on our enrollment, we had to come back and add $2 million in special education staffing. So while we were able to reduce expenditures by 4.9, we did have to come back and add about $2 million worth of positions. And so that was going into this school year. And so Melissa is going to talk to you about if we do nothing, if we were to continue and move forward with the operating expenses that we've had, the implications for that. So this is a busy chart, and we recognize that. It was an attempt to show 24-25, but what's the projection for 25-26? We do not know what's going to happen in this legislative session, and so a little bit of this is a what-if game. So what if, and we're just using the basic allotment as the example because that's one of the primary funding mechanisms in Texas school finance. And funding formulas, but what if there was an increase in basic allotment? What if it was 500, 700? So Melissa's going to walk you through this. Please stop and ask questions, and we'll point out implications of fund balance at the bottom, and then we're going to go into, okay, so we've known this, so what are we doing about it?
Can I ask a question real quick?
Yes.
And I think it may tie into this. On the previous 2 slides, there was a comment or a note on here about the no increase to the basic allotment since 2019. Can you talk a little bit about how that has also affected our budget over the last 5 years? Because we're funded based on attendant and not enrollment. Can you just touch base on just a little bit more about how that has affected our budget since there's not been an increase?
Absolutely. And, you know, the basic allotment, Texas school finance is incredibly complex, okay? And we know this. And your basic allotment is one of your primary mechanisms within the budget. So you get $6,160 per student. That's your basic allotment. Now, depending on what a student is coded, you also have what's called your weighted funding, your additional funding that you would If I were receiving special education services, there's a little bit more funding for me. Versus Gabby is a GT student, there's a little bit different funding for GT. So there are categories in which you can get some additional funding. But you're and we also get things like, there's this entry called TRS on behalf, which is amazing, that the state gives money on behalf of employees that goes to TRS. But you get funding for that as well. And it comes in and it looks like you have a revenue for TRS on behalf. You have the identical dollar amount goes right back out though in your expenditures because it's going to TRS on behalf. And so there's a lot that goes into that, but your basic allotment is your most basic funding mechanism, and that's why you hear school districts talk about, can we please see an increase in that basic allotment dollar amount?
Yeah, and if I can add to that, the basic allotment is how we fund our day-to-day operations. So that's like Melinda said, that's the basic funding mechanism that allows us to fund our operations. So debt service, capital project, our bond projects and things like that, those are funded or receive revenues outside of that basic allotment. So it's the basic allotment that helps us manage our day-to-day operations.
So Melissa, just time check, it's 5:27.
Okay.
So,
All right, so the first two columns, we adopted that $8.1 million deficit you see there to the far left at an ADA, a projected ADA of $12,788. You can see there as you move to the right, an adjusted budget. These numbers were pulled probably back in November, so ADA did not come in as projected. And as you can see there, that we're starting to just either drop 100 kids or stay level moving forward. So as we move into 25-26, you can see there that for ADA, we're pretty much trying to leave that just flat, right? We're not going to jump out there and try to increase any students at this point. That's probably one of the assumptions we'll make, is just leaving ADA flat, since that's kind of been our trend the past two to 3 years. And so the first column there for 25-26, the third column from the right, that is what our budget would look like if we did no budget reductions. There is an increase of about $800,000 in the expenditures for insurance, property insurance, and I just went blank. Utilities, thank you, for utilities and insurance, because those are constantly going up, okay? So that's why you see about an $800,000 difference in expenditures from 24 to 25. So basically, we're just saying, if we give no raise, if we increase those utilities and insurance, which more than likely will happen, and that's just a ballpark right now, you can see there that with no budget reductions and our projected funding, we would be looking at about $11.5 million deficit budget, which would drop us down well below, down to 11% below our policy for fund balance. So needless to say, budget reductions are necessary. Now, then the next three columns is basically the same data. However, the revenue changes, and that's projecting if there was an increase in the basic allotment from $500 to $900. And you can see there, with no budget reductions, let's say that the state came through for us and gave us a $900 basic allotment increase, well, we would experience a surplus of $3.7 million, which would kind of bump us right back into our policy and just keep us at the floor of that policy. So we'd be sitting right at about 2.5 months operating.
and then just as a reminder, that is taking into account no raises.
Yeah, there'll
Okay.
be no raises. And
Okay.
expenditures just remain the same except for utilities and insurance.
So the far right three columns are what ifs, and so we're going to talk about the reality moving forward based on what we know right now. Okay, so we're going to move into I think the next slide, please. So we're going to spent half the time talking about why are we where we are today and why are we here talking about this. The approach this year going into, so how do we approach and problem solve dropping our expenditures by somewhere around $8 to $9 million. And so the approach that was presented to the board, you approved a charter for forming a budget advisory committee. Mike's going to quickly talk you through process so that we can then get to the budget reduction suggestions and phases that we're here to talk about tonight.
Yep, so as coming out of that charter, we wanted to get a varied stakeholder group together of people invested in our school district, in our community, and we wanted to really do two things. We wanted to allow or ask them to be part of a process of generating ideas for potential budget reductions, and then we wanted to ask them to take the highest leverage ideas that came from that and help us evaluate those through some lenses. And the three lenses that we chose to use were, and we got feedback from the stakeholder group, from the advisory committee as well, is does it make meaningful progress towards our goals? So when you're talking about the potential need for $8 to $9 million in reductions, an idea that may save the district $10,000 or $15,000, it may very well be something we move forward with. It wasn't something that we were going to have the advisory committee to weigh in on because it didn't make it meaningful. So most of the ideas that we brought to the advisory committee were, to put it bluntly, what would be the most painful types of moves we would have to make. And there was a range in those ideas from around $300,000 to about $1.8 million in the reduction strategies that we brought forward to them. Second was minimize impact on the classroom experience. We've acknowledged with each group, and we had an in-depth discussion with our advisory committee, that any of these large reductions that would take place would have an impact on the classroom. But we did ask them to consider, as you could get as farther away from the classroom as possible, as they evaluated these ideas and helped give us some guidance on which ones they felt like were the best of the worst ideas that we could bring forward. And then finally, the long-term financial sustainability. Melinda spoke of deferments. You know, you can get really heavy into deferments, but those things at some point they still have to be done. There are some things you can't defer. You can't defer utility costs. You can't defer teachers in the classroom. You can't defer those sorts of things. But and also, is it something that we would immediately reinstate once funding became available? And so is it something that we can't live without? And those types of, so the long-term financial sustainability of the district. In all, we asked our advisory committee to generate ideas. We asked our BISD leadership team to generate ideas. We asked our, in emails we received, when Melinda spoke to groups, we asked, if you've got ideas, send it to us. No idea is a bad idea. And so we collected ideas all during the month of September. And then when we came back, and we spent our first budget advisory committee meeting basically spending the first half of the meeting talking about school finance, a little more in-depth discussion of the one we just had about why. And then we spent the second half of the meeting talking about revenue generating ideas, budget reduction ideas. And then in meetings 2 and 3, we had the committee come back and evaluate those ideas. And so looking at it through the three lenses that I just mentioned, we had them rate each one of the lenses or evaluate each one of the ideas through those three lenses on a 1 to 5 scale. So a 15 would mean it would make meaningful progress. Yes was most, or yes, 5 was yes, 1 was no. Minimize the impact on the classroom, 1 to 5, and then long-term viability of the district. And so we had a range, and we scored each one independently. It wasn't, they looked at a list of ideas and ranked them 1 to 10 on their favorite to least favorite, but we had them evaluated through the lenses of each one. And we collected those during meetings 2 and 3, and then we collected that data and we used it to help inform and advise our leadership team as we had further discussions around what would carrying out some of these budget reductions actually look like if we have to go that route.
And
So
real quick, how many people do you think we had attend those?
Yeah.
Just roughly, I think you know the number. How
We
many?
had 71 on the committee.
Okay.
The first meeting, we didn't take action in the first meeting, but we had close to 80% attendance at the first meeting. The second meeting, we had 65% attendance. The third meeting, we had 80 or 79% attendance. So they were, for as far as committee, volunteer committee work go, it was fairly well
It
represented.
was around 68 people. Okay.
And there was about, just the committee breakdown was about, it was 24% parents and community members, 14% students, and 62% staff.
So as a result of that, I'm sorry, do you have, someone have a question? Okay. So based on those individual sheets, they were collected from every member. Each time they evaluated a particular item, they were collected, stapled, and tabulated. And so what you were seeing here, so you see it says, it's like all of it, recommendation number 4, recommendation number 2. That was the number of the recommendation in order as they were discussed in the meeting. So the order that you see here was, if you will, it's, the scoring was like, if you're going to start somewhere, start here. Although, again, as I think Mike said it, it was a discussion. There were very few pros of any of these items. So when we talk about, we discussed the pros and cons, tables talked about pros and cons and shared out very few pros of any of these items. So it started with, if you're going to start somewhere, start with that increasing the secondary staffing ratio from 26:1 to 28:1. And then you can read as it goes down in order. And so what I'm going to share with you is my recommendation of taking those items and how we potentially could phase in those reductions if we have to get to other phases. And what I mean by that is, again, all of those things on those lists represent people. They represent resources and supplies that staff need. And while none of this budget reduction is resulting in someone being fired, it does result in someone being in a different position than maybe the position they're in this year. And so our proposal is to do this through attrition when it's reductions that impact our staff. And so phase 1 I'm going to show you in just a second are the recommendations that we start working on right away as we're going to build those into assumptions as we're developing the 25-26 budget. Nothing I'm going to show you in the next couple of slides is an impact to someone in this school year. So when we talk about a reduction in a particular position, we're talking about either for the 25-26 or 26-27 school year. So phase 1, we're going to get moving on. Phase 2, asking to hold until the end of March. Phase 3, asking to hold until next year. So real quickly, why March? Mid-March is the last day for bills to be filed. Our legislators will have been in session almost 3 months. So is there a chance we don't even have to talk about phase 2 and phase 3? Yes, there is. We hope we don't. But we also have to be ready in the event that our financial situation doesn't substantially change as a result of this session. And so I'm going to go ahead and move forward. Oh, sorry, go back real quick. Phase 3, we will be operating absolutely in the known at that point in time. So it's holding on those items until the session in theory would have ended, even with special sessions potentially being called. If they were to be called, we would be then making decisions based on what is known, whereas right now we still don't know what might happen to school funding in the session. So if we go to phase 1, so first it says evaluate position vacancies. What we mean by that is it's what we've been doing, so that's really not a change in practice. Every position that becomes available, we're going to need to study it. If we have a math position at a campus that comes available, we're going to need to hire it. We're going to need to fill that position. But if it's a position that could we hold on it, then we will hold on it. But we'll just, and that's what we've been doing. We've been doing that for over a year now. Second, it says align with current BISD staffing guidelines. As we have studied and we have looked at class sizes in every single classroom across this entire district, when we've studied our data, we still are actually in some cases below what is our own staffing guideline. Meaning we're currently staffed at 26 to 1, but we are below that on quite a few of our campuses. And part of that is how enrollment came in this year. And so we know we have to move to our current guidelines, and we will be recommending an adjustment moving from 26 to 1, moving up to 28 to 1 for secondary. We are also going to reduce budgets again, our local budgets. Just as a reminder, 85% of our budget is staff. It's staffing and it's benefits. That other percentage, a part of that is actual operating budgets. We're going to reduce that again, including cutting travel back. We're not talking about student travel. We're talking about adult travel, cutting that back. Obviously, adults will travel with students. I don't want to mislead anybody. But if it's for a professional conference or something like that, cutting back that by at least 50%. Although on the other chart, reduced central office staffing by 6% was lower, we're moving that up. And we reduced about 6%.
Last 2 years, 6% each year over the last 2 years.
6% over the last, so 6% prior year, 6% last year, and we're going to do another 6%. So we will be reducing central office staff by 6%. And then you can see the other items. Energy conservation plan, I can't tell you a dollar amount on that, but we're going to go all in on watt watchers or whatever it might be. And we have a lot of our systems that are not centrally controlled. We don't control the lights, we don't control the air. And so really making a conservative effort to turn lights off when we leave rooms, as well as we've been doing two program evaluations. One's in the area of special education services, and the other is with one of our more expensive products, which is Schoology. So we're studying that right now, utilizing our new program evaluation model that was developed last year to see if that's a savings. Reducing substitute costs for professional development, and then pulling back on summer enrichment. We were able to do a lot of summer enrichment programs for our students. ESSER funds helped us with that tremendously. We will still be having summer school, required summer school, but we will be backing off quite a bit on summer enrichment. We estimate this will save us approximately $5 million. We, again, will do this through attrition, and that's why I can't give you a perfect dollar amount. We are not firing anyone, but want to make sure we do this through attrition, and we feel like based on the normal turnover rate of staffing and the average of that each year that we would be able to do that. And then those final two bullets, I met with our transportation team and our custodial team to let them know we are exploring outsourcing. That does not mean I'm recommending that. That's why there's not a dollar amount in that. In order to explore it, we have to go out for an RFP and get proposals to see how could that save us money? And if so, what would that look like? We want to look at the implications for our staff. Our custodial staff and transportation staff do an amazing job. They are members of our family. We want to make sure that we look at what would be the impact to their benefits, to their salary, and to the quality of services for our teachers and our staff. And so we will be exploring that and would have to come back to you if it potentially saves us money.
Melinda, real quick, on the very first one, evaluating position vacancies, I just want to be clear, that does not mean a hiring freeze.
That is correct.
So
Yeah.
that term kind of gets interchanged with that, and it's not the same thing, so I just want to make sure people understand that as well.
That is correct. Thank you for that. So we're going to go into phase 2. Phase 2 and phase 3. I'm going to start with phase 2. These would be implemented. The phase 2, we would begin, again, implementation for 25, 26, not not this year, but the work would begin. Should we not know anything and it doesn't substantially change by the end of March, then in this phase, although the committee looked at library services, for example, on that previous slide, the committee looked at what would it look like if we replaced all librarians or maintained one and replaced with paraprofessionals. That's what they looked at. That is not the recommendation here. This recommendation would be that we would do some restructuring of health services and library services. What that means is we have already been doing some restructuring in health services, and what we have been doing is hiring more LVNs as we've had vacancies, as opposed to RNs, and Cassandra might jump in if I'm misspeaking. And then in library services, it would be reducing 4 positions in library services. And I'll come back to that one in a minute. And then high school coaching positions. So we know we need to be reducing, that was one of the things the committee looked at as well, is reducing at the high school level coaches and the number of coaches in athletic periods versus how many academic classes do they need to pick up. And so Mike will probably be able to elaborate on that in just a second. We think it would be somewhere around $800 to $1 million reduction in expenditures if we were to implement that. I've met with our librarians, our nurses, our leaders within athletics, and what we have asked, they will be getting a committee together, a group together to look at what could that model look like. What would it look like if we were to have fewer coaches in cross country, for example? What does that mean? What does that mean for total number of students that can access that? So they're looking at that so that in the event end of March comes and our outlook has not substantially changed, then we know what the model will look like. So Mike and Sam, along with our athletic coordinators, will lead the work with representation there. In library services, Melinda Lanham is our lead librarian, with Gabby, with some of our certified librarians, some teachers and principals to look at if we had 4 fewer positions in library services, what would that look like? Because we're obviously going to still be committed to providing services to our students, having libraries open, having books available, having lessons happening, as well as continue with our health services. So by March, we'll have a better picture of, so what would that actually look like? Phase 3 would be implemented in the 26-27 school year, and that would be further restructuring library services, interventionist services. So we have interventionists on all of our campuses. We're required by law to provide intervention services to our students, and but we would have to restructure that. Other districts have started some of that restructuring, so we would have to figure out what would that look like for Belton ISD in order to still guarantee our students had intervention, but would not be able to do that with our current staffing model. And then also reducing instructional coaches. So we would have to restructure that model. Now the dollar amount would be, again, it's an estimate. If we were to eliminate all of those things, the dollar amount would exceed that. But that's just the estimate if we continue to restructure in those areas. Am I saying that right, Todd? Okay. So, bottom red piece I think is super important. I'm not coming to you asking for the board to consider in the future a reduction in force. A reduction in force would be action you would take to basically file financial exigency, and that is what happens in organizations when you hear someone gets a pink slip. They box their things, they leave, they're not guaranteed positions. We believe we can do this through attrition, And so we are not looking at people losing their positions. Their position might look different, but not losing their job. What's the next slide? Okay, so real quickly.
Just a real quick question.
Yes,
If they change position, will their pay remain the same?
it's a great question. So, and Todd, you want to speak to that real quickly?
Yeah, so if it's like a teacher, so we may potentially move a teacher from one campus to another campus, depending on class sizes and those type of things. But we'll be looking for similar types of positions associated with that same pay grade for moves.
But one of the things we will have to look at is some positions have extra days built into their calendar, and that is why their pay is more. And so if that person is moved into a position where normally that position wouldn't have the number of days, then we would have to go into and we would work out an agreement with them for maybe the first year or maybe the first 2 years. Those days would still be in service to the district in the summer and would be able to maintain that salary for a certain window of time, with an understanding after that amount of time, it would have to go to the pay for the position in which they're sitting in.
Todd, you used the example of a teacher to teacher. What about if it's somebody in library services or instructional coach? How would that work?
Same type of thing.
Same deal?
Same type of thing. If it's an instructional coach, potentially, I'm just making it up, but maybe to a teacher role. Instructional coaches are 197 days, or teachers are 187 days, so what Melinda just described.
So it wouldn't affect their pay. They would say that, but maybe
We would-
after
we
2
would
years
keep-
it may.
We would keep their pay the same for a period of time.
And then for those days, they would help us with, for example, professional learning in the summer. Were you gonna ask?
I was gonna say what you just said.
Okay,
Yeah, no, you go.
okay.
Okay. One thing on the interventionists, to be clear, it is not your dyslexia interventionist or your behavioral interventionist or special education interventionist. It would be for those academic interventionists, primarily in ELA and math.
Yes.
Correct.
So before we go into communications plan, I want to stop and see if you want to go back to any of those phases and talk about any specific item within that, any questions you might have. Christine, could you go back maybe to phase 1 and then see if there's any questions, and we'll go to the next phase.
Melinda, with any of the phases that you're proposing here, is there any difference between the phase you're talking about and the phase that the advisory committee recommended?
The advisory committee did not provide us with phases.
Okay, all right.
They evaluated
data
each of the items.
With you, okay.
And then I'm recommending to you, certainly an option could have been to not have phases.
Right.
And say, all of this is going to be the recommendation to try to get our budget down by about $8 to $9 million. But we also happen to be in a legislative session. And so while I have no idea what's going to happen in this session, it could impact this. And so that's why the recommendation is to hold on some of this and let's see, and let's get a little bit further down the road within this legislative session, understanding that if, like in March, why March? If we wait too long, we already will have created a surplus list. Staff already will be placed in positions for next year. And if you wait too long and then add another group into a surplus list, a lot of those positions are now gone. And so the choice of options for those individuals gets smaller. And so to give individuals who might be impacted on that the maximum window we felt we could to be able to look for the positions within the district they're interested in, have some choice in that, and principals and other leaders having choice in that, felt like March would be important to move on. Otherwise, again, you wait until summer, which you could, but if we're in a financial situation where we have to enact phase 2, a lot of those positions will have already been placed.
Can we go back to slide 8 real quick? That's the 25-26 budget projections. Maybe.
Sorry.
That's okay. We're going way back.
I
Right,
know,
so-
I think, no, I
No,
can
no,
find
that's,
it
that's
here.
it, yeah,
Is
that's
this
it,
one?
that's it, yeah.
Thank you.
So, we have to do something, like, a do nothing is not an option, okay? So, if you take a look at the right three columns, and you see this is a hypothetical increase to the basic allotment of 500, 700, or 900, okay? I'm not sure what you're hearing, but I'm not hearing 900 is an option, right? I don't think that's anywhere right now. I'm not hearing 700 is an option. I'm hearing the best that we might be able to see, right, is something in the $500 range, right? And if you look at this, right, assuming the best case scenario is $500, and this is assuming no staff increases, right? And, you know, really only increasing utilities and the other things that have to increase, we're still below where we need to be from a fund balance standpoint, okay? And so there has to be a phase one, and there has to be a phase one that sticks in a way that minimizes the impact of the classroom as much as we possibly can, because that's probably the situation we're gonna be in, right? So.
There are bills that have been filed. I read two today that are calling for no increase to the basic allotment, but an increase to the teacher incentive allotment, so putting more funds into teacher incentive allotment, which our DWIT committee, our District-Wide Education Improvement Committee, is looking at in first week in February. And that is for, you know, it's a performance pay, if you will, opportunity for a small percentage of your staff, but potentially money in that. Looked at potentially money for safety allotment, but some of the bills that are even calling for, and I greatly appreciate consideration for increasing in funding for public ed, a couple of them have no increase in basic allotment. And so part of it is it's incredibly complex because it could be increased funding that goes through the Texas Education Agency in the form of grants. It can go in teacher incentive allotment. I have seen things about increasing the yield of your golden pennies. And, you know, so we're just going to have to watch this play out. But to your point, no, I've not seen anything with exceptionally large indicators of high changes to basic allotment.
I would tell you that's not exceptionally large.
Well,
So,
no.
Even those are not exceptionally large.
No.
Yeah, but that's, I mean, I think that's the best case scenario, right, that we're talking about, which means we're probably not gonna land there, right? So doing nothing is not an option, and so we have to get to phase one, again, in a way that impacts the classroom as little as we can, so that we don't find ourselves in a bigger hole in 26, you know, either 25, 26 or 26, 27. You know, that fund balance it's really kind of a delicate balance, right? So we say by policy, you know, it's between 20 and 25%. You know, we need to be able to make, you know, we need to have 2.5 months of cash on hand, right? So we can, you know, make payroll, we can weather a storm if, you know, something comes up. But you also don't want to go back to where we were in 2017, 2018, where we had in the high 30s, right? We did that very intentionally because we were going to open schools. If you have a fund balance that's that high, it also means you're collecting a bunch of tax revenue from the community that you're then just sitting on and not using, right? So that's not right from a community standpoint, right? So we really, like, that 20 to 25% is really our sweet spot to make sure that we're not, I'll say, overtaxing the community, right? But then also being responsible for, you know, what do we need to deliver and have on hand so that we can continue to operate.
Time check, 1 minute.
Yeah, and if I could go back to real quickly the list for phase one. Phase one will impact our classroom. And I think that's what's the challenge of this work is pretty much anything we're bringing forward to you would be an impact to a classroom. You know, adding additional students into a classroom. While we're doing the program evaluation for Schoology, and a decision has not been made, but that has been a tool that has impacted our classroom teachers and they've been using. Quality professional learning impacts teaching and learning. And so I just wanted to make sure we fully understand any of these items on here impact the classroom, even at a phase one. but yes, I hear what you're saying, Chris, we want to try to,
As little as possible.
as little as possible, yes.
I have one quick question on the phase two, because March 2025 will be here soon. And you talked about how those 3 certain groups are going to get together and look at how they can model based on the ideas you had. What's the follow-up on that? Will we hear about those ideas in March, or I'm interested to hear what they come up with?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll need to communicate that with our community and with our board in March. They need time, like Health Services has already been moving towards that model. Theirs is a little different because you can't surplus an RN and place them in their certification's unique. And so through attrition, that would happen. With library services, I don't have the timeline. Can you speak to timeline?
We'll start in the next couple of weeks with a group where we'll be asking for participation from certified librarians, from principal leaders, and from some teachers that'll come together over a series of meetings to review data, both nationally at the state level, and study some models and make a proposal with our team.
And for athletics, the initial idea that was evaluated was to move all assistant coaches at the 2 large high schools down to 1 athletic period. I know that looking at master schedules and teaching certificates of current coaches, they kind of came up with a number about how many that would actually probably work for. And so we kind of have a target number that they're going to work towards. Are there other opportunities to change or reduce staff that doesn't go to the one period model, but it may mean shifting some FTEs around? And that conversation will also happen with principals involved as they look at their moving from a 26 to 28 to 1 ratio, and there may be some overlap between athletics and overall FTEs on the campus as well as they work through that process. So.
Other questions? I know Becca gave us a time check, but I'm gonna end with this. So we have 4 Purple Star designated campuses for the first time for Belton ISD. We just found out that we are being recognized as a CTE destination district for the first time. We have over 184 AP scholars, 77 honor scholars, 56 with distinctions, all the way to, I have the most amazing Superintendent Student Advisory Council, and I have a young man that made a perfect PSAT score in there. Our students have earned already over 2,000 college hours. We are up to close to 1,000 industry-based certifications. We have over 3,100 active community volunteers that come into our schools and support our schools. I had to throw in barbecue. Our barbecue team is on its way to state. And we have multiple robotics teams from multiple schools that are on their way to state. And that is barely the tip of the iceberg of the amazing work that has happened this semester in Belton ISD. I'm incredibly proud to be in classrooms and see what our teachers design for our kids each and every day, and all the support staff that makes that possible. I'm incredibly proud to serve in a community that we've experienced tragedy recently in Belton ISD and stood at 2 different high schools and watched the outpouring of community support for our teachers and for our students. And so while yes, we are facing, like districts across the state, some serious challenges financially, we also have 13,700 plus amazing students and close to 2,200 amazing employees, and we will continue to do good work. And so this is emotional, this is impacting people, and who are doing great things every day. And so I don't want to end on budget is heavy, but also we have amazing staff doing amazing things for kids, and I know that will continue. And so I thank you, board, for letting us talk with you this evening, give you this update, and I know we have a room full of children we're about to recognize and staff in the PFAC.
Dr. Golden, thank you for that well-informed presentation. I hope that answers a lot of questions that the public has had. I know each one of us has received emails from different folks, and I hope that they were listening and hoping to answer their questions. So thank you very much for that. That concludes our board workshop this evening. There being no further business, we are adjourned at 6:05 PM.